Welcome to Breathe California TV. I'm Terry Trumbull, a volunteer. Breathe California is the lung health organization for the state of California. We have 6 chapters throughout the state. Last year here in South Bay, we helped 100,000 people with breathing difficulties. There's about 13 different forms of diseases and issues that affect your lung capacity. Today we're going to be talking with Tim McRae of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. I consider them to be an environmental group because they're taking so many good environmental positions. So we'll be back with Tim to talk about all they do in energy and environmental issues in 30 seconds.
The different therapeutic methods that we can help our very low socioeconomic status clients who have no alternatives, no anything, and there's still about 15 different resources we got out of this that if you have no resources, no service connection, you can still get aid.
That they are connected, one encourages the other, and that the process of change from backing off from the tobacco is the same as backing off from any other addictive drug.
Everyone can benefit from this training that we just were offered today. I would not take it back.
Welcome back. This is Breathe California TV. Our show, Environmental Affairs, has been on since 1992. Our focus is trying to help prevent damage to your lungs. Most of the money that's given to health organizations goes to working or treating diseases. I've always been offended that we don't spend more money and resources trying to prevent diseases. And I bet we're going to hear a lot about that from our guest today, Tim McRae of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. So start off and tell us what you do for the leadership group and what the leadership group is.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you for having me on the show. So I'm the Vice President for Energy for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. The Silicon Valley Leadership Group is a 501c6 or business nonprofit organization, and we represent about 350 technology companies in Silicon Valley. They just have to have a presence in Silicon Valley to be a member of the group. That includes clean tech, high tech, biotech, and on policy issues, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group weighs in at the local, state, and federal levels, and we weigh in on a whole array of issues that are important to our members. That includes transportation, housing, energy, environment, education, healthcare, immigration, the whole gamut. So I personally am trained as a lawyer, but my experience is in energy policy and politics. You mentioned that you consider the Silicon Valley Leadership Group an environmental organization. I was drawn to their environmental bent. I personally lived and worked in Sacramento for 6.5 years, working for an environmental organization called the Planning and Conservation League. And I've been working at this group, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, for about 6.5 years.
So one of the classes I teach is energy policy, and every year I give them a quiz for a question I'm about to ask you. Why in the world is leadership in transportation, energy, environmental issues, perhaps in the world, but certainly in this country, in this area? I mean, for example, transportation. Why are we the big leaders in doing everything instead of Detroit?
Well, it has to do with technological innovation, and the tech companies that we represent, the Teslas, the charging companies like ChargePoint and Volta, and even we have members who are based in Detroit but who want to be in Silicon Valley because Silicon Valley has such a great ecosystem of people, engineers, people who are business-minded, people who have innovation in their blood, want to live and work in Silicon Valley, and thus we're the epicenter for innovation in the world.
So when I moved here in 1973, everybody knew us as the leaders in electronics. Is it infectious? So,
Well,
does transportation, all of a sudden good stuff happen here.
Well, I would say that things that happen in California tend to find their way elsewhere. If someone invents the iPhone here, all of a sudden people want it all around the world, and we sell our products all around the world. Now, is it infectious in that people all of a sudden learn how to be better users of their iPhone? My wife might tell you that I'm kind of a Luddite when it comes to learning all the different apps and learning the different things on my iPhone.
My kids, I would guarantee that result for me.
Right, but we innovate here and we share that with the rest of the world, and I'm getting better, and we're all getting better with innovations that happen right here in Silicon Valley.
So another question I asked my students, I'm asking you this to judge how good my grading is of what they're doing, is why is the climate so much better in California for innovation in energy than it is in DC?
Well, there are a lot of reasons for that. So Silicon Valley has a unique ecosystem in which there are a lot of engineers who work here who don't feel like they have to work in the same place for their entire career. And so we get a lot of people moving around from business to business. And that's generally good, because then you have a stable base of knowledge, of intelligence that can say, oh yeah, Google's doing that over there, I'm going to go work for Google. And then Google, after 5 years, you know what, I think I'm going to go work for Apple or some startup. So we have a very good innovation ecosystem.
Fluid job market.
Fluid job market. We have very good educational institutions around here. Not to say that there aren't good educational institutions in DC. I happen to have gone to one of them. But Stanford and UC Berkeley are excellent places to go get your degree and then say, you know what, I want to live here and I want to contribute to the world by working for a Google or a Facebook or an Apple. And so that's helpful. Climate itself is a big draw. I originally grew up in Michigan, and I went to school in Washington, D.C., and let me tell you, living in Silicon Valley is pretty nice this time of year. So there are reasons that we compete, and the Silicon Valley Leadership Group does a competitiveness and innovation project where we release sort of a scorecard each year in which we say, what are the reasons that we compete better than places like Austin or Boston or Seattle, Southern California, and those are the things that come up every year, that we have such a healthy economy for talent, fluid people being able to change jobs, people liking the climate here, and people going to school here and wanting to stay.
Yeah, I think those are great answers. The one I ask my students about is relative to the consistency of policy. Nationally, everybody knows that the two parties are at each other's throats, and every time we switch parties for presidential administration, energy policy either goes up one way or goes down the other way. And to my amazement, since Jerry Brown first got elected governor and was very aggressively for energy conservation and alternative energy, subsequent Republican governors, Duke-Majan, Wilson, and Schwarzenegger, have not changed that. And Schwarzenegger, everybody thinks he was God's gift to the world in that area.
Well, I would say that it is a couple things are true. One is that there's a lot more appetite and a lot more support for positive environmental policy in California than there is at the national level or that you have in DC. And I experienced that personally. I worked for a couple of nonprofits in DC at the beginning of my career, moved to California, worked for a nonprofit in California, and all of a sudden you can get a lot more done. And it's in part because the public is a lot more sympathetic to environmental arguments. And we have this beautiful environment that everyone wants to live in and save. And so you're right, on the Democrat or Republican side, environmental policy, being good on environmental policy, has been popular in California. And so governors have latched onto that and said, we'll do this. And so you do have a consistent track record of policy at the state level, not dependent on who was in office at the time, Democrat or Republican, that has been consistent. The other thing is that DC is its own ecosystem in a lot of different ways, but the the whiplash back and forth of policy makes it so that people move to DC, try to get something done, don't get it done. Let's say there's a George Bush in office or a Donald Trump, and so they give up quickly. And in California, you have a consistent set of actors that, given the way that the term limits work in California, you have a much more entrenched third house. The lobbying contingent in Sacramento is a lot more powerful than it is in DC. DC, it's dependent on who's in charge. So for those reasons, you have a lot more consistent, positive environmental policy and energy policy in California than you do in DC.
So just because I got 2 law degrees in Washington, D.C., I do have to follow up on the climate argument you made. Nobody there would understand why I said it was coming back to the peninsula. And they said, but you have those earthquakes all the time. And, since I came back in 73, we've had one significant earthquake in 89. And everywhere on the East Coast, they got 5 hurricanes coming through every year. I mean, they just don't understand. They're just maybe terrorized by what they don't know.
Well, I think it also a little bit is like when people in Seattle say, oh yeah, it's terrible to rain here, you don't want to come visit. Sort of like people look at California and think like, oh, it's got earthquakes, it's got fires, I shouldn't live there. And the people are like, okay, if you don't want to come understand how it's so great to work here, live and work here, and if you want to stay on the East Coast, that's fine. Enjoy the East Coast.
Yeah. So I'm getting us distracted here, but because Breathe California is a health organization, I got to get in my compliment. The most amazing technological change to me is how UC San Francisco has just become total cutting edge, and medical technology has gone like crazy in this area. It's just simply amazing.
And that's part of the university ecosystem that I was talking about.
Yeah.
I mentioned Stanford and UC Berkeley, but UC San Francisco is definitely part of that. The other UCs in the area, UC Santa Cruz, San Jose State, where I know you teach, it's all a great feeder for the job workforce here.
Yeah. So talk a little bit as head of energy for the leadership group, what you're working on.
So we're working on a few things. As you might have noticed, the power went out in October and November, and we're trying to work on a number of different things to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So there are all sorts of things that the Silicon Valley Leadership Group would like to see, but we need to have much more investment in our infrastructure so that there are hardening of poles and wires above ground and a lot more undergrounding of lines that right now are above ground and thus are exposed to wind that can potentially start fires in fire conditions. We're encouraging the development of microgrids and policies that help enable basically different areas to island themselves from the grid with a local source, hopefully with clean energy, something like an electric vehicle or solar and storage or a fuel cell that can power that area of the grid so that it can be separated from the larger transmission and distribution grid.
So a neighborhood of 5,000 people wouldn't have to worry about an outage.
Exactly. And doing a lot more things to basically help the folks at PG&E be able to be more surgical about the way that they shut down the grid, so that if the wind is blowing way up the hill and you're much further down the hill, you don't have to shut down the power for the whole hill. They've basically got some work to do to be able to build that up. Another thing that we're working on, we've been working on for a few years, and this is an area that has to do with clean energy financing. So we have a lot of companies that provide clean energy, and the state has a lot of programs that provide clean energy financing, largely loan programs, across a lot of the different clean energy technologies that we represent, solar and storage and energy efficiency and electric vehicles. And unfortunately, the state has so many programs that they're literally sprinkled throughout the state government. There's some over at the California Energy Commission, there's some at the Infrastructure and Economic Economic and Development Bank, there's some at the California Treasurer's Office, and they're all siloed. They don't talk to each other. So we had a bill in the state legislature in 2018 and in 2019 to basically say that there should be a single place in state government that all these folks have to get on the same page and talk. And ideally, if there's a single place in state government where all the clean energy financing programs are being organized, then the private sector can come in and figure out what's working and what's not, and figure out ways that it wants to invest. So we didn't get that bill across the finish line in the state legislature in 2018 or 2019, but the governor was watching. And so he just released his budget in 2020, and it includes basically a version that we have shared with him that he's interested in implementing at the state level. So we're very excited about that. It's a way to leverage more private dollars to solve clean energy problems, and we'll be working with the budget, with the governor and the legislature to try to get that across the finish line in June.
So I told you off air that I headed a state environmental agency, and we had a lot of energy programs, and head of the Energy Commission back at that time frame invited me to breakfast and said, either you turn those programs over to us or we're going to ask the legislature to eliminate them, which is in fact what he tried to do. And happily the legislature and the governor laughed at him. But I can understand the difficulty in trying to figure out 40 or 50 different types of programs and whether you're eligible.
That's absolutely correct.
As a lawyer, I got a lot of work helping with that kind of stuff, because just fathoming how state government runs is tough.
Yeah, and that's also, I think, we've talked with other people who are interested in these sorts of solutions elsewhere in the United States, and it's also somewhat unique to California just because the size of our state government is so large. It's the second largest governmental entity in the U.S. behind the U.S. government, and as you noted, the U.S. government sort of whiplashes back and forth between who's in power.
Yeah, it's pretty serious. So there's been, at least on KCBS radio, there was a lot of attention paid to a bill that would require cell phone towers to have their own batteries so they run even in spite of outages. Is the leadership group involved with that?
We are not.
So we've put on, meaning Breathe California has put on 2 electric car promotional events, and has actually worked with the Gulway School District to have electric school buses. Is the leadership group doing work in that area?
We're doing a lot of work in the electric vehicle and electric vehicle charging infrastructure area.
And
yes.
You've got ChargePoint, a local vendor that's very good at that.
Yep. They're based in Campbell. We have a lot of electric vehicle charging infrastructure companies. We have a lot of companies that are making electric vehicles, including Tesla. And we have a couple of electric bus companies, one of which is based on the peninsula, named Proterra. And they all have the goal, and we share this goal, we try to help them advance this goal, of electrifying our transportation system to the extent that we can, because the big picture solution to greenhouse gas emissions is that we need to clean up our grid so that our electricity runs on as clean a mix as possible, and then run our electricity, or run our transportation on electricity. There are folks who are saying that we need to run our buildings on electricity, and reduce as much as possible our reliance on fossil fuels, like natural gas.
So another one that's big, I just got a questionnaire on it, is switching over appliances from natural gas to electricity. I was on Palo Alto's Utilities Commission for 3 years and proposed that when I first got there, and the staff laughed me out of the place. My fellow commissioners weren't as certain at them, and it's a bad idea. And when I left 3 years later, last July 1st, we're holding conferences about the implications of it.
Yeah.
Have you guys taken a position on that one?
So there's a whole effort by groups called the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and there's a local group. There's a local group has been going around and working with individual cities to change their REACH codes to try to encourage as much electrification and avoid use of natural gas as possible. And we've have those folks come and present at our committees. We have an energy committee that I run. We had some of those folks come and present at our committee. And we have every year an Energy and Sustainability Summit, which happens typically in May or June. And we had an entire panel on building decarbonization at that summit in last year's summit. And there were people talking about things that they're doing for new buildings, for retrofitting existing buildings, and we largely talked about it in the commercial and industrial sphere because as representing tech companies, that's what we do. But
just as an aside, in Palo Alto, they did much the same thing because council expects some pretty negative feedback from residents.
Yeah. And the toughest thing on all that is natural gas stoves. People love their natural gas stove. And so getting people to use alternatives to the natural gas stove is probably going to be the biggest battle that those folks have.
So I was astounded a few months ago. One of my clients was Calpine, which built a 600 megawatt natural gas plant. And I was told that they haven't been using it because we're doing so well on cleaner energy that it's been put there for emergencies.
Yes, so this is something that you will increasingly see in California, that as we're bringing on even more renewable energy and as our mix is getting cleaner and cleaner, we'll be relying even less on what years ago we thought, well, at least it's natural gas, it's not oil-fired or coal-fired, it's not so bad. A lot of people have trouble with nuclear, but we're even squeezing out the natural gas plants by now.
Yeah, pretty amazing. So I've been real slow. I'm 10 minutes late on our break. We'll be back in 30 seconds with Tim McRae. See you then.
The different therapeutic methods that we can help our very low socioeconomic status clients who have no alternatives, no anything, and there's still about 15 different resources we got out of this that if you have no resources, no service connection, you can still get aid.
That they are connected, one encourages the other, and that the process of change from backing off from the tobacco is the same as backing off from any other addictive drug.
Everyone can benefit from this training that we just were offered today. I would not take it back.
Welcome back to Environmental Concerns. My guest is Tim McRae of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. There was a meeting in San Francisco, maybe mid-October, on an initiative where they asked us, Breathe California, to consider backing a measure called Faster. And the meeting was emceed by the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. What's that about and what's going to happen with it?
So Faster is an effort that will likely be a ballot measure for all 9 counties that touch the San Francisco Bay in November of 2020. We're working right now.
Which is scary, it's this year.
Which is this year, 2020. We're already here.
2020 is still a little hard for me to assimilate.
So the bill, there's a bill in the state legislature that is needed as enabling legislation, and local senator, state senator Jim Bell is carrying that piece of legislation. We're working with him now. Assuming that gets passed through the state legislature, we will have this as a ballot measure. And the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, which has led many transportation campaigns locally over the past 20 odd years, would lead that campaign, co-lead it with the Bay Area Council and Spur. And what is it? So Faster is an effort to raise the sales tax in those 9 counties by 1 cent to fund transit improvements throughout the Bay Area. So it's a once in every couple generation opportunity to create transit as a seamless, throughout the Bay Area, well-funded
So one of the pitches we got is 34 different transit agencies in the Bay Area. We're going to get them better coordinated and run buses or other mass transit that connect things better than they do now.
Yeah, that's right. And if you raise the sales tax just that 1 penny, over 40 years, that raises over $100 billion. So if there's ever a point where you're on BART or you're on the Caltrain or you're in the bus and you're thinking, boy, if they just had a little bit more money, this is the answer to that problem. So we think that will be able to make it so that people eventually decide, you know what, I don't need to always get in my car. I can take transit. It can make transit seamless throughout the Bay Area. It can fund the improvements that Caltrain needs to do things like electrify. It can help get the final stages of BART coming all the way around the bottom of the bay so that we can have rapid rail around the bay. And we're very excited about that measure.
Who votes to put it on? You mentioned the legislature.
The legislature will need to pass enabling legislation.
And then all 9 county board of supervisors have got to put it on?
So this is an effort that would be put on the ballot, similar to Measure AA, which was one of the precursors to this. Measure AA was a 9 county ballot measure that funded wetlands restoration in the San Francisco Bay in 2016, and we co-led that campaign as well, and that was successful. And so, so that gets put on the ballot, and then the public vote for it. So we would need 2/3 of the public to vote for yes to raise sales tax to be able to fund all of these transit improvements.
So I told you I was going to ask about it. Carl Guardino, to the minds of many people, has been an absolute genius in getting all these taxes from 96 on to improve our transit. Paper says that he's just resigned.
So he hasn't resigned?
Yes. Are you the next genius that can get this passed?
We have a lot of people who work at the Silicon Valley Leadership Group who will be working hard on the FASTER measure. Carl has not resigned. What Carl has done is he has let people know that after a leadership after we do a leadership search and find a next leader for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, then he will step aside. So that's a 3 to 9 month process. So he's still the CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. He will be there until we find our next CEO. And we have a lot of very hardworking, very talented transportation professionals who will lead that campaign, who will be there if he's not there by the time that November of 2020 rolls around.
So we got about 30 seconds left. What do you want people to remember about this little talk you and I had?
So the Silicon Valley Leadership Group works with and for the community at large. And we have led a number of different local ballot measures, including a number having to do with transportation. And FASTER is going to be the next in that succession. And so we hope that you will consider voting for FASTER when it's on your November 2020 ballot.
So we've been talking with Tim McRae of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. He's their energy manager. Wouldn't surprise me if we have him or somebody else from the group back when this gets on the ballot to explain a little bit more of the details. Thank you very much for joining us. Tune in next week for another great show by Breathe California.